Hey, Cozy Gloves here. I'm wearing a hat, and this is the first video in the Principles of Mixing series. Why is it called Principles of Mixing? Well, it's not called How to Mix because mixing is driven by what you have a vision for. So let's really quick define what mixing is. Mixing is when you have a bunch of pieces of audio and you're going to mix them together. You're going to combine them in a way that's going to sound the way you want it to sound according to how you've mixed it under a particular circumstance. So for example, if I'm mixing audio for a television show, I'll make different decisions than if I'm mixing music to sound good in the general public, because the public's going to listen to it maybe over their phones, over their headphones, over there's going to be all these things. So we talk about principles of mixing also because it's opinionated. How you want something to sound may be different than how I want it to sound. So it's more useful to understand the principles, because if you understand principles of how to accomplish particular sonic characteristics, you will be far more equipped to get the sound you want underneath pretty much any circumstance. You could be like, oh, well, I know that the speaker is going to do this, so I'm going to mix it like this and make these moves so that it compensates for that, and then you get something that you like. When I first started out, mixing was not considered very highly in my chain because I just didn't understand it. Now I am a certified audio engineer. I get paid to mix. I know how to do it well. There's different types of mixing. Like you can mix monitors. So your only job is to make mixes that are good for the performers, versus you might mix in a television set. Your job might be to mix the Foley or mix the music. And then you send that to another mixer who actually mixes the dialogue, sound effects, Foley. They mix it all together for the final production. There's a lot of different stages, a lot of different jobs with mixing. So we're going to be focusing on mixing music and the principles of mixing, because if you understand these principles and a little bit about sound, you can go a really long way in creating the mix that you want. So we're going to be covering that. We'll get into advanced principles. We're going to be looking at basic techniques. A book that I studied out of when I was going through school is called the Mixing Engineer's Handbook. It's pretty much a standard book that people study, and I recommend reading it. We're going to be taking the 6 mix elements, but we're also going to be looking at things in a little more detail. I will engineer examples for you to see, and I will also show you some of the tracks that I've done. And some of the things you'll see in my tracks that have been properly mixed, they look a lot scarier because I'm automating a lot of things. The art of creating interest is very important. Mixing is also, because we're going to be doing music mixing, that's what we're going to be focusing on. Because that's that. We're not going to go into surround sound or any of that. The art of mixing music is, the art of mixing anything really is you're taking the listener through an experience, and you don't want anything to be distracting. So sometimes when you're brand new at mixing, you'll create distractions in your mix. I see it on Facebook all the time with people posting their tracks. Is they will mix things in a way that the kick may be very distracting from what should clearly be the lead synthesizer. They're like, oh, that should be the most important thing, but I can't get over this enormous kick that sounds so loud and obtrusive to this synthesizer. So that's one art. The most important thing in mixing, this is the most important thing, is the arrangement. If you have a crap arrangement, I don't care how good you are at mixing, it's going to sound like crap because your arrangement is crap. So this goes into composition and all that other stuff. You got to start with something good to mix it to get something spectacular. If you start with something spectacular, then you can almost mix it however you want. We are not going to be talking about mastering, but the secret to getting an awesome master is a great mix. And I even recommend trying to get your mix to sound like your master. That being said, there's a couple philosophies about when to mix, how to mix, and circumstances under which mixing is officially approached as a topic. The way I currently treat my creative process, and I vary it sometimes. Sometimes I don't master at all. Sometimes I mix to 0 dB and I'll compensate. And I'll do a couple tricks to get it to sound a particular way, because you'll achieve different sonic characteristics by going about it different ways. And remember, it's completely opinionated. So what I mean to say is you might do sound design and mixing at the same time, or some moves in your sound design will be combined with mixing, versus you might be tracking a band and you're going to mix the stems, right? You have all these, there's straight pieces of audio, like here's the guitar line, here's the drums, and it's a really different experience, especially when I was going through school for this. A lot of students didn't know how to read music or was new to them. They just wanted to mix music. To me, that was kind of like, what the heck? That's kind of weird, but it sort of makes sense. And you can legitimately do that. It's a little scary, I think, sometimes to hand your stuff over to someone who doesn't like play proficiently or anything. But when you hear pieces of their work and you see them at their craft, you see they look at it from a different point of view, a mixer's point of view. What they're aiming for, usually, they have their own sound, their own opinion. But when you're mixing to get maximum clarity and punch. You're not totally focused on being you're focused on maximizing it the perfect way if you were to crank your volume up. Now, if you want to make it sound great at lower volumes, sound like competitive master for loudness, that's a little bit of a different topic, one that we're not really gonna approach in this series. Another thing is I'm going to be showing you examples of mixing. Sometimes they'll be engineered examples. We're going to be looking at principles, remember, because the principles are the valuable part. But also, I usually work with, from what I said earlier, I usually work with stuff as I'm writing it. And so my creative process involves writing and being creative, doing whatever I think I need to as a creative professional. And then I turn it all down, and then I mix it back up. So I'm objectively mixing at this point. It's not like my prime focus. However, some compositions I'll end up mixing first. So we're going to talk about approaches to mixing, getting prepped for a mix, because there's all these different things you can do to prepare yourself for mixing. But some people will prefer to put whatever they're going to put on their mastering bus right up there at the front and then work with that on the whole time. That way they already know what it's going to sound like. And they'll basically mix and master at the same time. There's a lot of different styles I've found. For me, I really enjoy doing the objective mixing, but there's been a couple of times where I'm like, I'm not going to master this track. Instead, I'm going to mix it all the way up, toss some mastering plugins on it, then take them off, and then mix it to sound like that. Then I'll toss my mastering plugs on there one more time and see if there's any last adjustments I want to do. So in this series, again, we're going to be looking at the principles of mixing. I expect you to know some basic processing, at least go through my sound and synth basics. Make sure go through like the video topics. I'll post the links in the description. I expect you to know like some pretty basic stuff. We are going to be covering compression EQ. There's a sister series or a brother series, whatever you want to call it, to this series. That is the critical listening series, where we look at listening from a critical perspective. This is not ear training or interval training, rather becoming aware of what you're hearing and how the spectrum interacts with that hearing. So I'm going to put a link down below. I suggest you go check that out. I highly recommend, because remember, and this is the other big thing that you'll probably hear a couple times, is whatever display says doesn't matter if it sounds good. So if your display, like if you've got a channel that's clipping like crazy, like it's just clipping, then that's great. And people are going to tell you to turn it down, all these things. We'll talk about some of this stuff later. But what you need, we'll be talking about all this stuff later. But if it sounds awesome, then who cares? No one cares, okay? Some people have these stigmas. They've bought into particular philosophies. Now, there are technical limitations. Now, you need to take those into account. Like, for example, if you're mixing, it sounds great over your system, but you know that the system that you're going to be playing it over, somewhere else, if it can't handle that, if it's going to distort like crazy, then you should get rid of it. Like, you're mixing, remember, for another scenario. So where you're mixing might not always take place where you're going to hear it. But if it sounds great where you are, and it's pretty much the circumstance you're going to be in, then by all means, do it. Who cares what a meter says? Now, there are common practices, though, that have been put in place that if you follow these common practices, they will get you, some predictable results that are usually considered better than other ones. Like, for example, you don't generally want to be clipping ever. Some of this stuff has been carried over from the old way of recording. So it used to be that there was a signal to noise ratio that was really important. So you'd record with everything being really hot. Like, you'd make it as loud as possible without clipping, and then you'd mix it to sound good. So sure, whatever, maybe your clap sounds outrageously loud when you recorded it, but that way you don't have any signal degradation. Versus now with our new digital technology, we can record and we don't have to be so close to hot. We can actually record a bit softer. You still want to get good record levels, but it's not as much a concern as it used to be. And so things have sort of changed a little bit from the technological side. But anyways, we're going to be looking at general principles so that you can achieve the sound that you want. We're going to be showing examples and engineered examples of what this is. You now understand what mixing is. You understand that I expect you to know sound and synth basics, the critical listening series, digital audio basics, and I'll put links to those in the bottom. And especially just, you got to have a good ear. Remember, your ear is the final judge. Displays are useful for guiding your ear to hear a particular problem, but you also want to be careful. I forgot what they're called. I believe they're called McGurkic effects, McGurkic, something with a M, a muck or something in front of it. And it simply means that you looking at an object changes how you hear it. So you may consider looking away, turning off, ignoring the fact that you've done something, and just listening to the pure sonic results of what you've done. That's some of the most valuable advice. So besides arrangement, we're going to be looking at balance. So the balance in a mix, that is the most important part. If you take arrangement out of it and we're just looking at, okay, now you're mixing, this is what you got, you can't change the arrangement. Balance comes first, then you got pan, then you have dynamics, dimension, frequency spectrum balance, so EQ, stuff like that, pretty much just EQ. And then you have interest. That's the 6 elements they list in the Mixing Engineer's Handbook. They're really good 6 elements to run off of. That's really all it is. And if you understand the principles to get results there, you're going to get really great results. So I'm excited to be sharing this with you. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe. Support me on Patreon. It allows me to make videos like this. And have a blessed day. Look it up.